This is such an unmitigated disaster. What in the world have I gotten myself into? So one of the wheel bearings messed up on our Bushhog branded 2615 Legend. It's a 15-foot batwing Bushhog that we pull behind our tractor. You can tell that the bearings are messed up. I've never really done this before. I didn't find any specific videos or instructions online about how to do this on this particular Bushhog, so I'm flying by the seat of my pants here. So join me as I figure it out. First thing I did is I jacked the Bushhog up and then pulled the wheel off. There's a nut with a cotter pin through it, and then I'll pull the wheel off. The first thing that surprised me is I'm looking in here, there actually are rollers inside that I had to pull out. So I saw that the races were inside, and so I tried to knock them out with a screwdriver. Again, I didn't know what I was doing and nearly messed the whole thing up. It's best to use just a steel punch and just tap all the way around and slowly work the races out. So I took the wheel to a neighbor's house and he showed me how to tap those old races out. You can see the new race in the center. The old race is what I'm running my finger around now. In fact, the old race had so much rust and wear on it that it actually kind of cut and spliced my finger. One of them was not as in bad a shape as the other. Now, just so you know, there's a race and a bearing on both sides of the wheel. Now, right now, I'm tapping in to make sure that this race is seated really well, and I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on the other side as well. One thing I was told that you want to make sure that you do is use like a brass punch when you're tapping. You can see that's what I'm using as a brass rod. The brass will chip or ding more so than the steel. You don't want to mess up that steel race is the biggest thing that you want to make sure of. So now it's time to pack the bearing with grease. I put the grease on my hand. It was much colder than I should have used it. And as a result, I just start taking the back of the bearing and the housing there and just start trying to push grease all the way up around the rollers. Because the grease is so cold, it's not going in there very well. This is the first time that I've ever done this, and it's just an unmitigated disaster. I'm getting grease everywhere. I'm not getting it actually in the bearing. It's not until I play with it for about 10 or 15 minutes that the grease actually warms up in my hands, and then it starts going around the rollers. If you notice, I get grease on top of the rollers instead of just the bottom, and I just pull my fingers across the top a lot. It's best if you don't do that, because then it's hard to tell when the grease is actually coming from the bottom and through the rollers. That's just kind of a hard lesson that I've learned on this trip around, and so it took me about twice as long to get it figured out. In a few minutes, I'll show you what it actually is supposed to look like when the grease is actually getting into the rollers, but I'm just making a glorified mess at this point. I really, really wish I knew what I was doing right now. Because I have my hands covered with grease, I get Charlotte to try to help me move the wheel and everything over to the Bushhog. We're going to try to start putting it together, and then I'll pack the last bearing. So this right here is the back seal. It goes on the very back, and then you put a bearing on. You have the inner race with that bearing, and then you put the wheel on. Then you have the race that's inside the wheel, and then you have that outer bearing. There's a nut and a cotter pin and a washer that go on the outside that tightens everything down. So I'm just tapping this roller housing on with that brass rod. This Bushhog does not actually have an outer seal. It's just got a cap that goes on the outside. I'm not sure if it's best to put the bearings and the rollers together in the wheel and then try to slide it all on the axle of the Bushhog. This is just a guess on my part. But again, I'm not promising that I know how to do this. I'm just showing you my first attempt at doing it. So now I'm packing that second roller, and it's going a good bit easier. The grease is warmed up, and it's actually going in better. I've got a slightly better rhythm than I did the first time around, and so the grease is going up into the rollers a good bit easier. Let me show you now what it looks like. You can see a little bit, if you look real closely, the grease is just coming up around the rollers. In just a minute, I'll show you again what the grease looks like when it's going past the rollers, and you can actually see it start to bubble out in between the roller and that housing. That's what you're really looking for when you're bringing it in. So when I finally get this bearing packed full of grease, I try to put a little bit more inside the wheel where the bearings will be. There's a little channel on the inside, and I just try to coat that channel. Right now I'm putting it on the axle behind that second bearing. I just want to make sure there's plenty of grease there. So now I'm putting the wheel on the axle. I got to make sure that it's mounted on that roller bearing that's already in there. Then I push the other bearing in. It sits well, so I pull that outer bearing out. And now is actually the time that I'm putting the grease inside that channel of the wheel. So now I'm getting ready to put that washer on that axle that I was just pointing at. Then there's a nut that goes on. And then as you drive the nut with a wrench or an impact driver, it forces everything to get real tight, and it seals that bearing in the back. There's a little divot that catches the seal, and as everything kind of pushes towards it, it seals everything in the back. So now I'm just getting it tight with an impact wrench. Man, an impact wrench makes this part so much easier. I wish there was an easier way of greasing those bearings. If there is, I don't know about it. So I put the cotter pin in there, and I got it turned a little bit wacky. So I got to adjust that back there with a hammer. But now I'm putting the dome cap on all of that, and as I tap it in, that's actually how everything sets and seals from what I understand. Again, this Bushhog does not have an outer seal. It just has an inner seal or a back seal. I don't know exactly what those are all called. So I'm waiting now to get just the rubber mallet to tap it a little bit more. All in all, this has been a relatively easy job compared to what I expected. It did create a royal mess. It did take an hour or two to get the job done. Someone who knew what they were doing could do it so much faster. But anyway, thanks for watching this video. All I've got to do now is tap that in with that rubber mallet Charlotte just brought me. And then I'm going to set the Bushhog down, take the jack, put all the tools up, and try to clean this grease off my hands. I hope you found this video helpful. Take care. Have a great day. And maybe if you have a Bushhog that you need to get fixed like this, maybe this video will help. If you've done this before and you've got some advice for me to help make it easier next time, please leave it in the comments below.